All right, turn your booklet to Loving Your Mate Through the Seasons of Life, Part 1. Matt, would you find us 2 cups of water, please? Yeah. He's a good guy. Yeah. All right. We're going to do 2 sessions for you tonight, Loving Your Mate Through the Seasons of Life, Part 1, Part 2. The first one's going to be more of a generic situation. Nothing functions without maintenance. Your car, your body, your house. This is obviously true of your marriage. We're going to begin to give you a number of suggestions that we believe will be helpful in this area. Number 1, we believe you need to take inventory. Sometimes we ask people, how's your marriage going? They say, not too well. What are you doing differently? They say, nothing. What is insanity? Sanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. What we're going to do tonight is give you some definite suggestions. Number 1, we need to read a book a year on marriage. Go to the back of your booklet and go to page 1. Page 1, your additional resource list, under Marriage General Information. All right, everybody there? Page 1, do you see general information there on page 1? Somebody give me a yes or no. Hello, or somebody
there,
nodded.
Right?
Maybe you're getting sleepy or something.
Got it.
All right, see the first book, 7 Principles of Making a Marriage Work by John Gottman. We feel this is a very excellent book, whether you've been married 6 months or 60 years, basically doesn't matter. You'll find this book to be extremely helpful. We'll tell you more about it later on. So read a book a year on marriage. You might read it together, you might read it separately, but this book would be very good. Next suggestion is define your goals and your values. We suggest you do this on one of your bi-monthly dates. You say, what bi-monthly date? Well, we'll talk more about that later on. We want you to go out and celebrate, have a big time. That would be good. But sometime just the 2 of you sit down together with no outside interference, with 2 writing instruments and 3 clean sheets of paper. On each of you then, I want you to sit down and identify the goals that you would like to accomplish over the next 12 months. Maybe it's to finish an education, add on to the house, paint a room, plant a garden, whatever it might be. Identify what you would like to do over the next 12 months. Next then, prioritize. Prioritize. Which ones will be the most important? Put a 1 next to them, and maybe one that's not too important, you put down a 2. You should not have more than 3 number 1s, and you'll see a reason for that a little bit later. Next step, then, share. Trade papers. Find out what the other one would like to achieve. It's amazing to us that usually in a marital situation, you have a more dominant personality and then a more reticent, and the dominant personality overrides the reticent, and a lot of the times the reticent one does not accomplish what they like to accomplish. During life, and they sometimes get to the end of life and they're angry or depressed because of it. When you said I do, you forever gave up the right to make a decision for yourself. You're actually there to help one another. Next then, on that 3rd clean sheet of paper, create a joint list together. And that's why you should not have more than 3 number 1s, therefore you would not list more than 6 things. Finally, then, begin to talk about how you're going to accomplish these things. You're going to finish an education, where is it going to be? Do they offer the courses? If you're going to plant a garden, what it's going to be, and so on. Again, when you made that commitment, you made a commitment then to help one another. One of the problems we run into a lot of times in marriages are what we call marriage singles. They are married on paper, but they basically have a single mindset. You say, well, Jerry, we could do that and throw it in the drawer and forget about it. Well, you could. What we would urge you to do is, one of the best penmanship or can work on the computer, to put this on a little 3x5 card. Maybe even laminate it. Make several copies. Put it where you can see it, on the bathroom mirror or the TV screen or the refrigerator. And again, you made that covenant that you would help one another, and this would be extremely helpful in that area. So, 2 suggestions. 1, book a year on marriage and define your goals and your values.
Next, in taking inventory, it's not about me, or is it? It's not about me, or is it? I don't know if you can see that or not, but that's what that says. Several years ago, we came across a book. The title of the book was The Emotionally Healthy Church by Peter Scazzero. Those of you that are interested in that, The Emotionally Healthy Church by Peter Scazzero, and that last name is spelled Scazzero. And basically, his premise was that a church will never be more emotionally healthy than its members. And he developed that thesis. And as you kind of think about that, we can say that our families will be no more emotionally healthy than its members. Our communities, our state, our nation, take it just on to its end if you want to. But I would like to quote for just a couple of, maybe 30 seconds here from Mr. Scazzero, because I think his words can be a very poignant reminder for Jerry and maybe for me and maybe perhaps for all of us or some of us in here. If people really ask us what we're about, we work with marriage, yes, but there is a lot of good information on marriage. We work with parenting. There's a lot of good information on parenting. We look with relationships. But if you really look at what we've really tried to do, we've tried to help every one of us look at ourselves and grow up emotionally and spiritually. That's our end game. That's what we want. Because, ladies and gentlemen, if you can find two individuals that are emotionally and spiritually mature, there's really nothing that cannot be resolved. I quote Mr. Scazzero, "You can be a dynamic, gifted speaker for God in public and be an unloving spouse and parent at home. You can memorize entire books of the New Testament and still be unaware of your depression and your anger, even displacing it on other people. You can fast and pray a half a day a week for years as a spiritual discipline and constantly be critical of others, justifying it as discernment. You can function as a church leader and be unteachable, insecure, and defensive. You can lead hundreds of people in Christian ministry while driven by a deep personal need to compensate for a nagging sense of failure. It's not about me, or is it?" If you remember on Monday night, we were talking about some of the things that would determine the mental glasses that we would all look through, our perception of reality. And the words, or hopefully the phrase you never forget, is not right, not wrong. What?
Just different.
Okay, some of you got it. Okay, not right, not wrong, just different. Imprint that in your brain. It can save you an awful lot of grief. But if you remember, we talked about chronological age, life experiences. We talked quite a bit about Robert Cloninger's, those genetic personality traits that come, obviously, genetic through heritability, our relatives, blood relatives. And then Jerry kind of segued in and out of physical health. And he mentioned if we work with some type of physical issue, it's much harder to see the world the way anyone else does. It's not right, it's not wrong. The reality is each one of us has a huge sphere of mental energy every day to use up, and we have a huge sphere of physical energy every day to use up. And if that's why we need to rest and replenish. If we're using a huge chunk of each of those spheres, or either one of them, just to do the day-to-day task to exist, we don't have a lot left over, do we? We just don't when we hit the big bumps in life. At that point, Jerry also mentioned depression. Now, this segment is probably about 18 months old in our conference. We're always putting information in and out. Some of the key things obviously will stay there, but other parts of it. But we have found through the years that depression is something traditionally that individuals, especially in the part of the country where I was reared, the Bible Belt, which might include where some of you were reared as well, depression is something that is not talked about that much. not this way in the Northwest. We came out of Oregon a couple of weeks ago, and it's just, I'm not saying it's a better culture or worse culture. It's just a different culture there. Certainly not up in New York State, New York City. It's just a different thing. It's not right or wrong. But we have found traditionally that in more of the Bible Belt area, maybe the southern area, at least in our experience of the United States, depression has been something that among conservative religious groups has been very embarrassing. People just didn't want to talk about it, and it's a shame because dysfunction thrives in secrets. But we were kind of looking, well, if I'm not joyful, I can't control my moods, and so I'm a bad person, and I'm not about to let you too close to me and to tell me I'm hurting because I don't want to look bad in your eyes. Okay, and so we play the church game. I've played it, you may have too. Our life may be falling apart. We come into the place of worship or our assembly, and the first person you say, you say, hi, how are you? And what are they supposed to say? Fine, right? And then what are we supposed to say? They say, how are you? We're supposed to say, fine, and we lie. We lie because we're not fine. We're all kind of working with stuff. Okay. So, as I indicated, dysfunction thrives in secrets. Depression is one of those areas that there's a lot of misunderstanding about. So, Jerry and I just kind of put the cards on the table face up. Now, Jerry's going in just a moment to go through the 4 sources of depression. I'm going to linger on the 4th source and then dip back into the 3rd one. And by the way, if you are wondering if we're going to cover that information that we mentioned on Monday night, I'm disappointed in myself. What were the other 2? I can't be perfect, and regardless of what I do, it's not good enough. We're going right down the path at targeting how to counter those mindsets in this first hour. Now, regardless of the source of the depression or sources, they can combine sometimes as well. The symptoms can be very, very similar. And again, I'm back to my yardstick, my favorite yardstick. All right, because we have a continuum here. And symptomatically, we can go all the way from just a minor blue day. All right, all of us have had those days when we just want to kind of huddle in the corner and nibble cat food. I mean, it's just a bad day, and we just want to feel sorry for ourselves. We want people to leave us alone. Just let it be. Okay, and then all the way down here to this end of the continuum, which would be suicidal ideation and everything in between. Now, the sources may be different, but the symptoms can be very, very similar. All right. Now then, let's look at the 4 different sources.
Number 1, we believe there's such a thing as a spiritual depression. You see, when a person is spiritually depressed, or a person's life is out of sync with God, they can be spiritually depressed. What we have found, some people got enough Christianity in their life that can't enjoy their sin, enough sin in their life that can't enjoy their Christianity. Oh, they're church members, all right. Yeah. You'll see them there Sunday morning. You even see them there even on Wednesday night. But you see, they're not taking church for credit. They're auditing the course. When you ask them about their Christianity, oh, well, I was raised in the church. You don't find that in the Bible. It's not there. Many times they are what they are because that's what their parents were. In other words, they have not made the decision whether or not Jesus Christ is a legend, liar, lunatic, or Lord. They're there, all right, but it's really not a top priority as far as they're concerned. If it's convenient, they'll do some things, but if it's not, they're out of there too. Second is what we call a situational depression. The key word here is the idea of loss. Remember we talked Monday night on anger turned inward, repressed anger? The key here is the understanding that a person has lost some things. This is why older people sometimes become depressed, because maybe they've lost a spouse, maybe they've lost their job, maybe they've lost their income, maybe they've lost a child. And so the key to understanding the situational depression is the idea of loss. Third, and Lynn will go back to this a little bit more, is early environmental. In other words, the emotional needs of that person were not met in the earlier days. And as a result of some of the unmet needs in early childhood, then this then surfaces then later in adulthood. So you have spiritual depression, situational depression, early environmental.
But there is also a very real fourth source of depression. It's the genetic depression. And while all of the depressions are going to work with chemicals in the brain, okay, remember last night we worked with dopamine, the feel-good chemical. Tonight we're going to work, and there are others obviously, but that's the main one we targeted. Tonight we're going to work with serotonin. And that is the chemical, among others, that work with our highs and our lows. Now, all of the depressions are affected or by this chemical and the way we process. I'll get to that in just a few moments. But the genetic depression, there's always a history of some type of it in the family of origin. Grandmother, grandfather, aunt, uncle, mother, father, brother, sister. Years ago, it was called a streak of melancholy. A streak of melancholy, and people really didn't know how to work with all that. One of the variations of the genetic depression, if it's just kind of a general type, would be the genetic anxiety. This is the spinning mind, and it is not ADHD. You know, that comes in your frontal lobe part of your brain. But when we're talking about this, you're working with the reasoning part, the higher order reasoning in other parts of the brain. It is, the spinning mind is, and we don't like it because you say anxiety and then again it's a red flag for some of us. Not supposed to be anxious, that's a bad thing. Now don't confuse anxious with worry. Worry has a face, right? But anxiety is a generalized feeling of incompleteness, a generalized feeling of drivenness, a generalized feeling of I can't get it done. And usually it does not have a face as such. It's just a global sense. You've heard of obsessions, people obsessing on things. That's really probably the mind just playing over and over and over and over and over and over. Okay, and compulsions kind of come when people kind of start acting out on that just a little bit. Years ago, people would reference nervous breakdowns. Probably what that was just severe anxiety attacks. Long before people knew how to identify that and certainly treat that, regardless of what that would look like. Individuals that have the spinning mind don't really know they have it. Because if you can't trust your mind, what do I try? I mean, you know, I assume everybody thinks the way I think. Don't you do this? I mean, what else do we know but the way we think, correct? And so if I suspect this in a person, I'll just ask them, can you ever be still? Can your mind ever be still? And we're not talking about caffeine-induced, and we're not talking about substance-induced, but can you just relax? Or when you go to sleep at night, does it always churn? Not just sometimes, but churn. Now, again, it's not right or wrong, good or bad, but that is a leg off of this genetic depression. There is another version of it that is called the bipolar, the mood swings. And, well, that's kind of a misnomer because sometimes it's the highs and the lows, and sometimes it would just be the depressions that just then come back up to a baseline and never really go high. And that's kind of a dicey kind of diagnosis to make and thing to look with, to work with. And it can be all over the map as far as severity levels. As far as individuals that we might know about, that, okay, let me back up a minute, then I'm going to pick up the bipolar. Okay, let's go back to the genetic depression, just the regular version. All right, if you have, I guess the person that we would know most about genetically that would have a genetic depression would be Abraham Lincoln. Now, again, if I'm back to my yardstick, you have some people down here that are serotonin factories. These are pony in the pile people.
Oh, pony in the pile. Well, what she's referring to is an illustration or story that two little boys came up to a great big pile of manure, and one of them looked at it and says, yuck. The other one says, well, with all this manure, there's bound to be a pony here. Let's start digging.
Right. They are high on life, not unrealistically, but high on life. You can't get them down. They're not better than others. They're not worse than others. They're kind of fun to be around. They're not unreasonable, but you just can't get them down. Raining today, flour's going to be great, market's in the tank. That's okay. We're going to buy. I mean, it's just. I mean, they're just gonna go on through. But it's a genetic thing. We'll talk about how that is in a moment. There are others that are hardwired. The moment of conception. This is the conception stuff we're working with, all right, that are basic down here deficient, or almost. Abraham Lincoln definitely would have been marginal. And why do I know that? Well, one reason, you can look at the photos of him in his teen years and see the sadness on his face. You can. There was a lot of tragedy in his life. Granted, but if you ever have a chance to go to the Lincoln Presidential Library and Memorial in Springfield, Illinois, take the time and do that and read some of the letters written to him and from him. And they will reference his breaking into tears at inopportune times that were just not concurrent with events. In other words, they were just out of sync with what was going on. And if you look at the family of origin, there was a thick history of it, identified as it was way back then. Okay, brilliant man, absolutely, do wonderful things. That's not what we're talking about. I'm just trying to give you an example that you might be able to identify with this. Now, as far as the true bipolar, the very, very extreme mood swings from the very, very lows to the very, very highs. And keep in mind, all bipolars aren't that way. Not at all. Some are more mild when they swing, and others just depressed, then they come back to here. They never go this way. But the person I think most of us would know more about would be Robin Williams, the comedic genius. Dom DeLuise, those of you that might remember him, he was another. And when you saw him, now there was substance abuse, but that was not Robin Williams. When you saw him on the comedic roles with the one-liners, I think the first time I really ever saw him do that was in Good Morning Vietnam. Most of that was ad-libbed. I mean, it was just pure him. I read a editorial in Time magazine after his death that said this interviewer had done an hour or 60-minute interview with him, and in that length of time, I think he had used something like 52 or 53 voices. I mean, that's incredible. That is absolutely incredible. The mind, it was just always popping, always popping, always popping. However, he had the dark side of that too, genetically. So much so that as he began to age, and according to autopsy, he had early onset dementia, as well as signs of some early onset Alzheimer's, Parkinson's as well. He just could not stand the thought of his own life in the later years, and tragically took his own life. All right, now then, that would be the extreme, but that would kind of give you some idea of where this can go. All right, now, you say, well, fine, but does that mean we're all hardwired with the same amount of serotonin at birth, or some of us have more of it at birth and some of us less, or I don't know. As far as I know, science doesn't know yet. There's no way to mark that. You don't dissect a living brain. You know, you can't, the only way to determine this really is heritability and word of mouth and stories, life stories, and what the family did, or the history of the family. As far as whether hardwired at the same amount, maybe. Or maybe some of us are hardwired with more of it than others. Maybe serotonin factors really have a whole bunch of it genetically, and the rest of us don't. I don't know. I just don't know. It doesn't matter. It just is what it is. I mean, that's the way it plays out. Maybe we all have the same amount, but we use it in the synapse differently, where we process information. You know, those who remember a little bit of that biology, you have your neuron, your brain cells, and you have your axons and your dendrites coming out there, and you have this, the whole brain's electrical, you send impulses, and then you have certain chemicals that are matching with other receptors, and then it targets different things from autonomic nervous system to fine order reasoning or motor skills and all of that stuff. And so maybe we have the same amount, but some of it's just going around over here. And so that's where your antidepressants come in, ladies and gentlemen. And again, this is where there is so much misunderstanding, because people, well, I'll get there in just a moment, but your SSRIs, your selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, just kind of block the reuptake of that stuff and keep it where we need it in that synapse. Now, let me just bring this home and explain it a little bit better, hopefully. Now then, the way it often plays out, at least in our work. Let's say you have this marginal person, all right? Either the way they process it or not, they were hardwired with it. And you put them on a farm 400 years ago. Would they have been symptomatic? I already agreed they would have. But that was a different time. I didn't say a better time, a worse time, a different time, correct? Early to bed, early to rise, hard physical labor. There was not a lot of outside stimulation, and certainly not a lot of outside activity. They didn't go anywhere. Very limited if they did. That individual would have been symptomatic, but they would have functioned at a little more optimal level than that same person would in another culture, another time. Okay? Let's take that same person, that marginal person, and put them in the world when I was a little girl, the 1950s. It wasn't better, it wasn't worse, but it was different. It was a different world. Telephone, oh, we had one. Yeah, I remember. But we had a party line, and she was always on it, so we never talked on it. Although I confess, I did love to eavesdrop on the neighbors till Mother made me stop. Television, I think we got one when I was 9, 10, maybe. We never watched it because you couldn't see much anyway, and had silly bunny ears, you know, and aluminum foil hanging off of it, and all kinds of stuff. You know, internet, no, my grandmother wore a hairnet. Does that count? iPhone, what?
iPad?
No, internet, no. Blueberry, Droid, no. Blackberry?
Blackberry Pi.
Oh, yeah. Oh, after school activities for kids. I have you on that one, extracurricular activities. I went to Brownies once a month. That was the precursor to Girl Scouts. We ate breakfast every morning together as a family, dinner every night together as a family, and if I've heard it once, I've heard it, well, they say 1,000 times. You know, you may eat fast if you want to, but you will sit at the table and you will talk until everyone is finished. Eating is a social affair, and it was. I'm not saying it was better or worse, it just was. We didn't have money. We played outside as kids. We played outside. Okay. You see where I'm headed? You could take this symptomatic person, but they would have functioned a little bit better than they would in another decade, another time. Okay? Now, let's bring it to 2021. It seems like so many times, so many weeks we're on the road, we'll run into a serotonin factory married to a marginal, now dumped down here to deficient. Now I want you to look what this life looks like with the deficiency now, or marginal serotonin factory. What do we have? Dual learning household, children going everywhere, people passing in the night, constant noise, constant stimulation. You can't make a phone call without listening to someone's music. You can't shop for groceries without listening to someone's music. You cannot stand on an elevator without listening to someone's music. We're in and out of airports all the time. And it is the rare individual above 4 years of age that is not watching something, talking on something, playing on something, or in the BlackBerry prayer or whatever it would be. And if that's not bad enough, when we come home, what do? We turn on the stimulation. We turn it on and we go to our electronic corners and we've got constant noise, constant stimulation, ships passing in the night, constant noise, stress. Do you see where I'm headed with this? You take a person again that would be function better, that same amount of use of serotonin 400 years ago in the 1950s, you take them, put them in our culture, and this is where it affects our work, a serotonin factory married to this person. Now, because of the rhythm of life, this person's dumped down here to deficient, just barely hanging on. And the serotonin factory, like the tendency for all of us, is to think, well, I process information this way, so everyone should process it this way, okay? And we hear it, and in their words and their tone, and they look at this person that they promised to champion, and they say, if you prayed enough, you could do better. If you had enough faith, you could do better. And I want to say to this person that's being so righteously arrogant, I don't, but I really want to. I bite my tongue. I say, you know what? If you had enough faith, you could grow 6 inches taller. Get with it. If you prayed enough, you could grow 6 inches taller. What's wrong with your prayer life? What's wrong with your faith? Because what they're asking that spouse to do is that ludicrous. And on the flip side of this is the 21st century, ladies and gentlemen. If you are symptomatic of any of the types of depression, I'm in no way giving you license to tell those people you say you love, this is just the way I am, you work with me. No. There are too many resources available, and we'll go through some of those in just a few moments. We're not talking about whether or not you're a good person, whether you're going to heaven. That's not our deal at all. You know that. What we're talking about is the quality of life. And by the way, if you or your spouse suffers from any of the forms of the genetic depression, there's a very, very high probability at least one of your children, grandchildren will as well, maybe all of them. It would be a great gift for your children if you could get whatever treatment you had to have to function optimally, because if it reared its head in their lives, you could just pull up beside them and say, there's nothing wrong with us. You know, this is the way it is. This is our culture. Now, if you've got a marginal person and they don't want treatment or they don't want whatever that would look like, okay, I say, fine, move up on a Colorado mountain somewhere and take all stimuli out of your life and you're going to be fine. But if you want to live in our culture, you may have to make some modifications here a little bit. You really might. And that might mean an SSRI for a period of time. It may or may not. I don't know. If it's genetic, it may if you want to live in this culture. You say, well, my mother would just flat die if she knew I had to take something. Don't tell your mother. It's not her business. She might have functioned better if she had had something way back then. Yeah. That is the first time I've ever gotten it. Okay, but do you understand what I'm saying here? We're talking, this is your life, your family, your quality of life, the people you say you love. But I will close this very, very small segment with this admonition to ourselves as well as perhaps to all of you. And believe me, Jerry and I need this as much as anybody. We would urge every one of us, be kind to the people that you meet. Be kind to every one of them. Because, ladies and gentlemen, everyone that crosses your path is fighting their own personal battle.
Right.
You may not know what it is, but rest assured, they're fighting. All right. The early environmental environment and depression, let me set the stage, and then I'm going to hand it to Jerry, then I'll probably hog it back if he don't want to finish it. Okay, we're back to this pyramid of the personality. You're sick of it, but I hope you'd never forget it. And the accident of birth, that nature-nurture thing. You remember? And part of the nurture would be the early voices. The early voices, the shoulds, the oughts, the have-tos, and the musts. And generally speaking, the mindsets of I can't be good enough and I have to be perfect start then.
Okay, let's talk about the two mindsets Lynn has talked about. First of all, I must be perfect in everything I do. Now, realistic, rationally, you understand, hey, that can't be. We cannot then be perfect. But if the message I heard from youth, we're going back to our family of origin we started with on Sunday. If our family of origin then was the idea of perfectionism, that you have to be perfect, then I'm going to grow up with that mindset, and if that mindset is essential for me, then what am I going to think about for my spouse? What am I going to think about for my children? So, now I must be perfect in everything I do. Just cannot be. The first cousin to that is the next one. Regardless of what I do, it won't be good enough. If the message that I heard from youth was criticism, again, I'm going back to the family of origin. If the message I heard was more critical than it was affirming, then I will carry that mindset into adulthood and feel that I'm never good enough, that I don't measure up. Clinically speaking, we call these emotionally needy people. God loves them, and we do too, but let me tell you, folks, they're hard to get along with. They're hard to affirm. You can't affirm them enough. They will wear people out. I mean, you see one of them coming down this road, you're going to go up this road. You know, you just can't handle that much longer. They don't keep friends long. Children reared in that kind of atmosphere, I mean, when they're launched. They're out of there. Again, I come back to the book that we recommended at the beginning with, John Gottman's book. And let me tell you why it's so important. What he did a couple of decades ago, he went up to the Northwest and built what he called a love lab. And he invited couples to come up to that love lab and spend 48 hours. And he watched them through one-way mirrors. Now, the bathroom was off limits, the bedroom was off limits. In other words, he's not into kind of geeky stuff. But he watched these couples for 48 hours. And then he tracked them after they left of whether or not they stayed emotionally connected. Not because of the stigma of divorce, not because of finances, not because of children. What he decided then, that he could watch a couple no more than 10 minutes and predict with 90% accuracy of whether or not they're going to stay together emotionally. Here's what he found. He said the thing that will drive a couple away emotionally is criticism. It might criticism by body language, it might be words, it might be eye contact, it might be a number of things. The human spirit cannot handle an enormous amount of criticism. And what he said, for a couple to stick together emotionally, there need to be 5 positives to every 1 criticism. Now, here again, some people who are critical don't feel they're critical, they feel they're helping. But if what I say to Lynn, she perceives as being critical, is actually critical. 5 positives, every 1 criticism. Then he went as far as to say, the key to a successful relationship, emotionally connected, he did it in 1 word, kindness. That the couple were kind to one another. Now keep in mind, he's not religious at all. I don't know what he is, but I mean, religion has nothing to do with him. But what he found out, it sounded like something you heard in a Bible class somewhere, that they're kind to one another. They did kind things to one another. They were concerned about one another, and they expressed this kindness. And that was, he said, was basically the difference. And that really solved a problem that really both of us have seen in couples. We have seen couples out here that were not religious at all, don't believe Bible, God, anything, having great marriages, wonderful marriages. And God's not in their life at all. But what they found is they practiced this idea of kindness to one another. On the flip side of this, we find other couples, both claim to be Christians, and I mean they're fighting and back and forth, their marriage is a wreck, because they were not practicing this idea of 5 positives to every 1 criticism and the idea of kindness. And he said that was basically then the difference.
And by the way, about 25% of what you say would be the actual words. The remaining 75% is tone of voice, eye contact, inflection, body language. And so all that counts as well. It's not just the words. It's what and how it's said and all the other things.
All right, that's the bad news. Let's talk about solutions. Okay, number one, acknowledge the mindset. I must be perfect in everything I do. Regardless of what I do, it won't be good enough. You see, how are you going to deal with anything if you don't acknowledge what it is? Again, if you're with us on Monday night, we talked about this, that you have to understand what the mindset is. Number two, accept responsibility. Did your family of origin have something to do with it? Absolutely. We have emphasized that from our conference beginning on Sunday. But you take responsibility. You take responsibility for yourself. That's the first step in any 12-step program. Next, and this is what Lynn's going to do in just a minute, seek Christian resources. Folks, we've got resources out there. You do not have to live this way. You don't have to live this way. If you choose to, that's your business, but you don't have to. And finally, the goal is to see yourself through the eyes of God. God is more interested in your direction than he is your perfection. If perfection is the standard, we're all booked, folks. When you look at great people in the Bible, whether it's Noah or Abraham, they weren't perfect, but their direction was right. Now, turn to your additional resource list, and we're going to walk you through the things that you need to have that are going to make a difference in the quality of your life. So go back to the back of your booklet, and you'll find the additional resource list.
Page 8. And while you're turning there, you know, theoretically, it would really be nice if every one of us could look at our accident of birth and objectively and say, okay, this block is not optimal, this block isn't optimal, this one isn't optimal, we're going to take them out. Well, you can't do that. Why? Because we're up here in our life stories. Some of us kind of up here in our life stories. And if you take the base, a block of any structure out, of a foundation of the structure, what's going to happen? The structure will implode, correct? And so what I'm going to walk you through right now is exactly what you would do if you were paying whatever, $100, whatever an hour for cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's not going to cost you a dime. All it's going to cost you are a couple of books, or 3 or whatever you want to buy that we did not write and we do not get a kickback from, and maybe a year of your life. And I don't mean you can't do anything but this. What we're going to do is exactly what I'm going to teach you now is exactly what would happen in therapy. You can't take the blocks out, but you change the shape, the size, the color of the blocks. You change your self-talk. The shoulds, the oughts, the have-tos, the musts, all those, the things that we operate as if they have to be true, and if they're not true, all is ruined. No, all is not ruined. We're trying to change some of those words probably instilled in us by people that loved us, but maybe that's the way they were reared. Every one of us, I think, has the obligation to build on strengths of our caregivers and enhance those and correct the weaknesses and try to go on and make it better for the next generation. Correct? That's what we're all about. And that's what I'm about right here. Now, first of all, that first mindset, I'm disappointed in myself. Ladies and gentlemen, I guarantee you, if there's something about me that I don't like, other people are going to pay for it. Unless I am very astute and very mature. If I don't like what I do, if I don't like the way I look, if I don't like what I've accomplished, if I don't like what I'm doing morally, other people pay for that in some way. It's just what happens. I met expectation in myself. Somehow other people are going to catch it. So, first of all, if you see that as an unmet expectation, just take inventory. Okay, is there something I can do? Am I disappointed in myself? Why? Do I need a little more self-care? All right. No one's going to do that for me. I can be proactive with that. Maybe I could eat healthier, or I could exercise. Maybe I'm disappointed in how far I went in school. Well, you know, online now, you can go back to school when you're 84. You don't have to do it for anybody but you. You know, you're disappointed in how you spend your time. Well, turn off the television and invest your life in something that is going to last beyond you. You see what I'm saying? It's not that hard. The greatest problem is to break inertia of nothing. You know, fear of the unknown is greater than fear of the known. I don't like it here, but I don't know what that is, so I'm just going to stay here and be miserable. Don't do that. Don't do that. Okay, that's within power. All right, but let's look at the can't be good enough, have to be perfect. On page 8, hopefully you've had time to get there now, on your additional resource list, you will see a title or a heading, Issues from Youth. It's that first title. Now then, all of these books are evangelical, so if you think that we're here to whine and blame parents and to feel sorry for ourselves, you're at the wrong place. These books aren't going to allow it, and neither am I. We claim ownership of our lives. We all have stuff in our past. Welcome to everybody else, all right? But we're responsible for what we do with that. If you are the child of the overt alcoholic, chances are one of these mindsets is pretty well imprinted in you. The book that you would begin with, and there are many others, this is not inclusive, but they will certainly lead you to others. The Healing Journey for Adult Children of Alcoholics by Daryl Quick. That's going to be your 4th title down. And that's where you would start. This solves nothing, it's just information. A lot of times when people were reared by an alcoholic, they don't have a clue the profound impact they can have on their choices and functioning as adults. It can make a big, big difference. If you are the child of the dry drunk, and that's kind of a misnomer, but the dry drunk family operates just like the wet drunk family, only there is no substance. There's no alcohol, there's no substance, there's no gambling. In fact, many times these families look perfect. And as Shakespeare would say, therein lies the rub, because there's no such thing as a perfect family. But in these families, the families of the dry drunk, the addiction is appearance. You look nice, you smell nice, you act nice, you don't embarrass us, you don't fly out of formation, you make our family look good. And so the child gets the message, either spoken or not spoken, that what people think about our family is much more important than what the child is going through. Either way, wet drunk or dry drunk, ironically, the children launch into adulthood equally wounded. Why? Because in both cases, the parents were missing in action emotionally, right? One, because of the overt addiction, alcohol or whatever, and the other one because of a more covert addiction, appearances. Okay, the book you start with, if you are the dry drunk family, is Adult Children, The Secrets of Dysfunctional Families by John and Linda Friel. There are many others. That's the 3rd title down. The Released from Shame, right above that, would be good for the child of the wet and dry drunk. Scroll down with your eyes. Changes that heal, how to understand your past, healthier future, broken children, grown-up pain. Okay, but all these are just information. That's fine, but that's not going to help us get better. All right. Now then, I want you to go to page 6. At the bottom of your page 6, you will see depression. It's a subcategory. And additional challenges, but depression. That first book, New Light on Depression, Help, Hope, and Answers for the Depressed and Those That Love Them. This volume contains a wealth of information. It's authored by a Christian psychiatrist and a doctor of ministry. And they will go through the 4 sources of depression. They will go through the different types of antidepressant medications, and if that is needed, also, the different types of therapy that can be very good, especially if medication first needed for a period of time, and even without that, and all the different types of therapy. But I will warn you, if at some point you decide to go into therapy, realize that there are all different types of therapy, and you are a joint participant. You and you alone define what get better looks like. Everybody got that? It's not the medical model. You go to a doctor and they make us well. They give us a shot or something. That's not the way therapy works. The therapist hopefully will have the tools to help you attain your goals, but it is not their job to tell you what to do. you've got to claim ownership of some of that. Okay, and so that would be the next title, but that's still information. It's a great title. The next two titles are the ones that will rewire the brain. These are the ones that will take about a year, give or take, of your life. And the Freedom from Depression Workbook, the title Beneath the New Light, book. The Freedom from Depression Workbook, again authored by evangelical psychiatrist, and the Feeling Good Handbook by David Burns. These two books, and get them both. The first one, Freedom from Depression Workbook, is the evangelical twist of the second one. The Feeling Good Handbook is the only book recommended by the American Medical Association for mood disorders. And don't let that scare you. Everything has to have a title. That just means depression or whatever it would be. But work your way through. They will teach you how to stop your thoughts almost in midstream while you're thinking them. This isn't good enough. I have to be perfect. I have to do better. And they will teach you in tiny increments. It's hard. It's running into tennis shoes. Where is that thought coming from? Is it from someone that loved me but did the best they could, but they really didn't know what was realistic here? Maybe they were covering for their own issues some way. If you work this program for about 5 months and you see no difference in the way you're processing information, there's a high probability that physical leg is short for whatever reason. In other words, you may be so depressed you can't argue with yourself. You're going to have to argue with yourself to do this. Your mind may be racing so much you can't argue with yourself. If that's the case, you see nothing different, I would suggest that you see a clinician, and they may have to do something to bring this physical leg down so you won't be so depressed you can't argue with yourself, or you can slow your brain down enough to make some difference. Okay, that is just the tip of the iceberg. If I can help you more with this, and you would like to give me a call, email our cards on the table back there. We've got to move on because of time. But the bottom line is you don't have to live this way.
See, Sunday morning we told you we were going to deal with depression on Wednesday night. Now we've dealt with it. In other words, you don't have any excuse. Well, I'm just going to have to live this way. You know, you don't have to live that way. What we're here and our whole conference is about is to try to give you a quality of life. That's what it all is about. And what Lynn is out, you don't have to have this mindset. You just don't. And so really we've outlined in the direction we need to go. Developing healthy relationships, what's going on here? Number one, you need to make God the source of your strength. Again, we have emphasized this. We are God-centered. In other words, God would not create a relationship that would compete with our relationship with Him. You were not made to live outside a relationship with God. You can try it if you want to, but it just doesn't work because that's not the sphere or the area in which God wants you to live. Secondly, be open about your needs. We talked about communication on Monday night. I hope you see that each session is building upon previous sessions. That's why communication, we spent 2 hours with it on Monday night, was so very, very important. You need to learn to communicate with one another about what your needs, and don't assume that the other person can know. Now, it doesn't mean that they can meet those needs. That's not what we're saying. But we need then to be able to communicate. Next, you need to pray together every day. Gentlemen, I lay the gauntlet down. Sunday, I'll lay it down again. Step up to the plate and be the spiritual, moral leader of your family. The cry we get all the time from women, from wives, I wish my husband would step up to the plate and be the leader that God wants him to be. Gentlemen, do it. Quit making excuses. Don't tell me how long you've been a Christian and you don't pray with your spouse every day. Gentlemen, I'm not mad at you. I'm not trying to put you in a guilt trip. I'm trying to get the men of the church to wake up and see what their responsibility is. Lynn and I, when we married, we determined we'd pray together every morning and every evening. Have we missed a few times? Yes. Not many. Sometimes she prays, sometimes I pray, sometimes we both pray. Prayer is extremely important. Read your Bible together. Gentlemen, take the lead. When was the last time you and your spouse sat down and read the Bible together? If you can't think of it, folks, something's wrong somewhere. Side note, I want to commend the men of this church. I challenged them Sunday morning in Bible class to make this a priority, and so many of you have. I want to commend you, gentlemen. You have made this a priority. You have come every time. I know you had to leave maybe work. Maybe you didn't get a supper or anything else, but you came, and I want to commend the men of this church that put this as a priority, have come every time. And ladies, go home tonight and thank him for the spiritual leadership that he has been, especially even this week. Next, heal the hurt. You're going to have hurt in any kind of relationship, friendship, marriage, whatever it might be. You need to learn to let go of the past, victim or victor. If you were with us on Sunday, we talked to you about forgiveness. It's releasing my right to be hurt. It's not saying who was wrong and who was right, but I'm not going to allow retaliation, revenge to be the agenda of my life. We taught you how to forgive. So you've got to have forgiveness, and not just in a marriage, but also throughout life. Secondly, heal the hurt. Nope, accept responsibility. Here we go. Accept responsibility for a situation. Well, I wouldn't have done this had you not done that. No, you didn't. Well, if you do this, no. Accept the responsibility of your situation. Next, build positive experiences. You reap what you sow. In the next hour, we're going to give you a lot of good, positive ideas that will enhance your marriage and enhance your relationship, maybe stronger than it has ever been. Next, correct distortions. Sometimes we do not have an adequate view of one another, and we don't understand. And maybe we attribute things to one another that are really not true. Here again, in working to develop a relationship, you need to correct the distortions. And finally then, look for areas of personal growth. If you've ever been in a weight room where young men lift weights that are trying to play football or any other kind of sport, it's no pain, no gain. You're going to have pain in any kind of relationship, whether it's a marriage, a friendship, or family, whatever it might be. But realize, that we'll work on building these things, and we'll talk about how you can do it. See your relationship as spiritual growth. Lynn is a spiritual influence on me. I'm a spiritual influence on her. Look for those areas and work. We close with one final suggestion, that's prioritize. Prioritize. We give you our 3 priorities. You might have some others, but here are the ones we have. Number 1, God matters. God matters. Terrible tornado hit Nashville area. 20-some odd people lost their lives. One man was going down to the basement and barely got down there with his child when the whole house left. I wonder what was prioritized or priority with that individual. How much priority does God have in your life? If Christianity became punishable, would there be enough evidence to accuse you of being a Christian? How strong is God really in your life? Not by words. As I told the men Sunday morning, Jesus did not come to this world so we could talk about him. He came to this world so we might follow him. And we're going to have to decide what we're going to do. Number 2, doing what he says matters. The Bible is a book of not just information, it's transformation. The 10 Commandments are not suggestions. They're commandments. And finally, people and their feelings matter. We find this in Jesus' ministry, as he had a paper-centered ministry. The next hour, we're going to talk about adjustments, some things that I think will be very fine that can help any marriage in your relationship. And I would really urge you, maybe you hadn't planned on it, but you need to hear this next lecture. Before we turn you loose, quickly, number 1, we thank the elders of this church for having us to come. I appreciate very much Jack and all his people that made this thing a success. He's done a great work, and so be sure to thank him about it. We would want you to go home and thank God. He's the wind beneath our wings. He receives the glory and honor and praise for everything we do. If the conference has been helpful to you, we ask you to share it with other people at other churches in this town, in this state, out of this state. That's how we get conferences. It's just basically by word of mouth. If the conference has not been helpful to you, we suggest you don't tell anybody.
Well, you can tell us.
You can tell her, but I don't want to hear anything about it.
All right, tell me.
We hope that you will stay for the second hour. We're going to give you a short break, and we'll be right back.